Hey everyone, and welcome to Formula Boss, where we get to listen and learn from interesting people. Today, my guest is my longtime colleague and friend, Leslie Warner. Leslie and I've known each other for a long time. I think, didn't we say like 1997 or so?
Yeah, like 99, I think it was like when we
Oh,
started.
99. I
Yeah.
like that even better. Leslie and I
Yeah.
met through L'Oreal. When I first met him, I was in charge of hair color development for the Redken group, and I'd come over to the labs. Leslie was a bench chemist at the time, and since then, he has grown into this amazing career. Just to brag on you a little bit, Leslie, you have a master's in cosmetic science, a master's in social work, which I think is fascinating based on the business that we're in beauty. And you've worked on all aspects of permanent and demi-permanent hair color, both retail and professional brands. So you're all up to speed on new technologies. You're a formulating chemist. You understand hair color. You've worked in Japan, you've worked in the US, and you have a particular interest in diversity and inclusion as it relates to hair color. How was that? Did I get that?
No, that was great. That was great. Thank you for that.
So, in terms of like the diversity and inclusion, what was one of the last big things you worked on?
In terms of diversity and inclusion, I know one of the big things that we're working on is uh, sort of taking a holistic approach to hair color. We got inspiration from the makeup industry in terms of how they obviously when dealing in foundation, they match it to people's skin tone. But we had this wonderful idea of like really moving further with the idea of matching skin tone to hair color, which was sort of an untapped area. You don't see as much of that going on in the hair color industry, or a focus on that. So one of the things that I was doing and starting to work on was a sort of a skin typology study where we related skin tone to hair color and kind of guided consumers as to sort of what would be the ideal hair color for their skin tone.
So, connect the dots for me. How did the makeup world influence your creativity on that project?
I think the influence on sort of how the makeup industry had been sort of groundbreaking in how they really talked about complexion, and how it was spoken about, and traditionally they sort of like broke it down to racial categories to say, okay, these are the skin tones. Whereas then there became this new move towards not making it based on ethnicity, but really on skin tone. In other words, you could be uh, a fair-skinned African American woman can have the same skin tone as an Asian woman.
Uh,
So, sort of breaking away from that kind of thinking of how we approach it. So we took inspiration from that, and really started to really relate. And because that's how it was in hair color, you know, they would have ethnic brand, and they would say, okay, these are good skin tones these are good hair colors for this skin tone. But so that was kind of the way that we looked at it in a different way, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. You know what's so interesting about that? As a hairdresser for many years, we all picked up bits and trivia about how to match hair color with skin tone. Oh, your eyes are brown with a gold fleck in it, or you have pink undertones, or you have yellow undertones. And I think what you're doing, or what you just spoke about, is super interesting because it puts a little more science behind it.
Yeah, yes. What's fascinating about it is again, when you go to the study, you track and see how people see themselves. And sometimes it's not always exactly how like people are very influenced by celebrities, for example. So a lot of times they'll come into a salon and say, I want to look like Jennifer Lopez, even though their skin tone is completely different from her, but they want that look. So it became interesting on how you can influence and how colorists who have a lot of power in that because they really can influence it, the consumer in terms of and guiding them into like what works best for you. But For example, what we did a workshop. We worked with a beauty trend agency, and we did a workshop where we had stylists come in and we took trend colors, so trend shades that were coming out, and they adapted it to. They had a whole group of ethnic models, and they adapted that trend look to
Uh,
each model based on their skin tone. So it was a fascinating exercise. So there were like one trend, one sort of color trend, and how you can adapt that to the specific consumer and their skin tone, and it was a fascinating exercise, and how you could do that. Uh, you know, uh,
You know what I think is interesting of what you just said is, people have this impression of a scientist, white lab coat and the goggles and behind the bench and mixing a little bit. But when you add that trend forecasting piece into it, that creativity piece, I think that's something that I always like to try to communicate as a color chemist, as a formulator. You folks are the creative ones. I know I always oversimplify this. Maybe you can help me out here, but you have a big book. You know that dye A plus dye B will give you approximately the result of C. But it's sort of the proportion and the amount, and when you introduce that the creativity comes in. So, can you talk to that for a minute before we move on to a whole bunch of other questions? How is it that, how do you I want to say explain, but how do you tap into creativity to create hair color shades? Where's your head go?
I think it starts from, it's always a collaboration, right? So it's like, mixing the science with the research of the things that we hear. In other words, the normal process of how we would come together to create shades is that we would get, let's say, marketing would send us a brief and say, okay, these are the trend colors that we need, and how can we approach this and get this result, um, you know, um, and maximize the color result with the least mitigation and damage to the hair. So this has kind of always been the colorist, chemist mission. And then we really find creative ways of how to achieve that, through technology, through, looking at ways in which we can really maximize and looking at it from a different uh, angle, I think, in terms of how you can, there's a traditional sort of way in which, from a chemical standpoint, how we achieve great color or maximum color. Usually it's the whole concept of lift and deposit. But where the innovation is sort of like, how can we create that, but maybe do it in a way that's less evasive and not as damaging to the hair. And that's where the innovation and creativity comes into play. Also, just different color effects, how you can kind of, there's been a lot of really interesting innovations that have come about, in terms of, there was one innovation we had where it was where you can turn on and off your hair color at one point, based on the pH that you keep the hair, which was an interesting. But I have to always emphasize that what we as chemists have to always keep in mind is that we have to link it to the consumer. Because one times what's happened sometimes is that we get in our little lab, and as you were saying, we get really into like, oh, this is interesting. But if it doesn't have a foreseeable benefit to the consumer, then it doesn't have the value or impact that you need. So it's so important for chemists today to always, and we always get that instruction, put yourself in the mindset of a colorist, and what would they need? What is it that is going to be really of value? How can you make it so that, and that goes not just in terms of the end result, but also it's like usage quality,
Sure.
application, these kinds of things. So I think so it's all a combination of all that that drives the innovation, sort of like having a consumer centric mindset, and then coming up with the technology that can kind of bring that about. So
That consumer centric mindset. I think that's what
very important.
brings the chemist into reality. But you said a few things that's very interesting. Even in the process of development, let's say marketing says to you, we need 5 shades We need them to be some degree of brown to cover gray, etc. I'm sure your mind begins to think what combination of dyes to use and pH and what alkalizer, etc. But even in the process of development, I don't want to say mistakes. I don't want to say you stumble onto a mistake shade,
Mm.
but I know in my career when I've worked with chemists developing stuff, maybe a shade wasn't right for the specific project that marketing briefed. But man, that's a good one to remember for future line extensions
Oh
because you
yeah.
stumble onto something super interesting.
Oh yeah, no, that happens a lot. That happens a lot where, because sometimes a lot of times, sometimes, a big part of what we do sometimes is reformulation based on something that we need to. And the brief is that you want to do this reformulation. It could be for a variety of things, but the idea is that you have to still match the result that's on the market. And then many times with the chemist, you come up and you were I'm working on a shade, for example, and it's even better. It's like, oh, this is a great shade or whatever. And then I'm told, no, 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 we didn't ask you. We didn't ask you to improve it. We want you to match it. But in those cases that I put a star, we say, okay, this is a nice shade. It doesn't meet the brief, but it's an amazing shade. We could use it somewhere else. And we literally had done that where we took a library of shades that, were really nice. They didn't really fit the brief, but we put a star and said, okay, you know what? This would be nice for a future launch or something else. And it's happened quite often where
Yeah.
we refer back. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it's a shame that we just can't take that improvement, but that's the business of beauty and the business of hair color. And that's where I have to collaborate with marketing. They know the numbers, they know the production run, they know how many things sell and what customers and distribution will buy it. And if they say match it,
And you just match it, yes, and and to that point, I think that you see that traditionally sort of that the direction is usually it comes from marketing, the sort of the idea or the market research has shown certain things and we get the direction from them, but that goes both ways. So we also influence marketing and the market. We can come and say we can, if, like, for example, that example I gave, if there's a shade that all of a sudden just by chance I created and it's not necessarily matching the brief, but we can influence them and say, listen, this is not maybe what you would ask for, but look at what we've created. And then and times have happened where they've actually created a brief based on that. So you see that now. You see it happening, the flow going back and forth, the push and pull that comes with the collaboration between the research and marketing.
so I think that's fascinating because you have global experience because you've had to formulate color for other countries. And I know in my experience, what Japan wants and needs and what their regulations are is different than the US or what the EU does. So your inspiration of creating something that Japan may want and then proposing that to the US group or the European group is pretty exciting. And I think that that's where the partnership comes in with hair color. As a developer, as a marketing educator, it's like, hey, you guys know what's up. So why don't you tell me what's new and what's interesting? And speaking of new and interesting, Leslie, one of the buzzwords that I hear a lot of, that a lot of brands are engaging in now is sustainability.
Mm.
So as it relates to hair color, the tube, the green movement, the ingredients, etc. In the nutshell, in the elevator pitch, what does sustainability mean and why is it important in the beauty industry?
Yeah, sustainability is indeed an important facet to the industry as it aligns with the values and expectations of the consumer. So, really, by focusing on sustainability, companies can ensure that they are creating an environmentally friendly product, which is something that consumers care about the most. And this, when we talk about sustainability, it includes like reducing waste, using renewable resources, and minimizing the carbon footprint of the production process. However, I always have to stress that What's always important to the consumer is the end result. There cannot be a compromise on quality. Susie from Nebraska, yes, she's concerned about the environment, but she wants her hair color to look a certain way. At the end of the day, she does not want to compromise on that at all. So that's always sort of the guiding force when we're dealing with sustainability, is to really maintain that quality, all while being conscious of the environment.
Okay. So the sustainability sometimes is overlapped or confused with natural. I want a natural hair color. So, from a cosmetic chemist perspective, can you please speak to the point of what is, if there is, a natural color, and what are the pros and cons of that in terms of performance?
Yeah, so I think when they talk about natural, color, it refers to, hair color that resembles shades found in nature, and sometimes such as various shades of brown, blonde, black, red. And these colors are often achieved using dyes derived from natural sources, such as plant extracts, like think henna, for example. And natural color can be a popular choice for individuals who prefer a more subtle organic look. However, I think that the benefit, from it from a environmental standpoint is there. However, we don't have a technology yet that allows us to get the same color result that we would get from a traditional dye, that we would get from a more naturally derived uh, dye or alternative, if you will. So we're not at that point yet where uh, you know uh, it can replace completely the traditional dyes that we have now in terms of, let's say, for example, gray coverage. We're not at that stage yet where we have that technology, but I would say stay tuned, because
Well,
again, with the movement of now towards more sustainable products, that is definitely something now that is being evolved and worked on. And but we're not there yet. I guess is my point is, and it's yeah.
so I can't crush up chamomile tea and put it on my level 6 dark blonde hair and sit in the sun and be a fabulous single process blonde. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's like it's not going to, I think just from a chemical standpoint, it's like again, right now the process of using extracts like plant extracts as dyes, obviously that it's not the traditional chemical process that happens. It's not using an oxidizing agent, and the benefit of that, it's always the case. The things that are maybe more chemically induced or are the ones that are the best performing. But that whole concept of lifting the hair and depositing, the mechanism is different when you're dealing with the natural dyes. And whereas now, for example, a natural dye or pigment would be sort of on the surface of the hair, it's really not penetrating like you would a traditional dye would when you have an oxidizing agent, and it's really going into the hair follicle. So because the mechanism is different, it's not allowing us to sort of replicate exactly what you would get,
Yeah.
from a traditional means. So that's where the innovation has to come into play. Like, how can now, let's say, with a plant extract, can we create that effect, or create a mechanism that helps to penetrate it into the hair so that you can get something that replicates what we see traditionally, the traditional dye.
But I'm having this sort of deja vu moment. Weren't there brands that were trying to do that sort of like a henna-esque type product? And I don't think they were terribly successful for all the points you just made. You can't lift, you can't really cover gray, and you don't have a wide variety of tonal selection to create things for clients. So I like when you talk about not yet, because tell me if you agree or not that for the most part, hair color technology hasn't really changed much in 100 years.
Um, I, I wouldn't say that necessarily. I think that I think what we do say in the industry is that big breakthrough technologies take a while. So it takes like, I would say usually, I would say, let's say every 5 years, you'll get a disruptive technology in hair color. So it doesn't come as frequent as like say other, cosmetic disciplines, like makeup and things like that. Because you're dealing with reactive chemistry and it is a complex, chemical process that's happening. So yes, it comes, less frequent that you'd see big disruptive things happening, but it does happen. So there has been advancements for sure that has happened. Like for example, one of the big breakthroughs within the last, I don't know, 10 or so years has been, the non-ammonia uh, brands, that permanent hair color without the use of ammonia, which was a big breakthrough. But what happens also why it takes so long is that it takes a while for those technologies to really be developed and fully realized. It takes time because sometimes you need that data, in terms of understanding the long-term effects of maybe going with that technology. So that's why it takes longer. But when there is a big breakthrough, it's big. I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah.
non-ammonia. That was a big explosion to the
That
industry.
was huge. So, Leslie, I'm going to ask one last question as part of our part one interview,
Sure,
and then we'll reconvene with part two.
sure.
So, my last question is about the MEA versus ammonia. Now, I don't want to lead the witness, but do you, if any brand came to you and said, create a hair color for me, would you use an MEA or would you use an ammonia?
Well, first I would say what the difference is on the two of them, between the two. I think the main difference between like MEA permanent color and say ammonia permanent color lies with the alkaline agent used, right? So MEA is milder alternative to ammonia, and it's less likely to cause scalp irritation. However, though, ammonia-based permanent color tends to provide stronger, more vibrant color results. That's sort of the main difference between the two. I would say the choice, though, between the two depends on the individual's hair condition and sensitivity. So that's really what would sort of guide that. But when we talk about the differences in sort of delivering, like if we talk about great coverage and dealing with that, ultimately, traditionally, you say that the ammonia permanent color is, and it is arguably still the best to achieving that. But however, I think that for other reasons why you would select MEA permanent color also, can be effective in doing that and being able to
Yeah.
achieve that. But again, like I think it really depends on the individual's hair condition, which route you would choose between the two of them. What works the best. But
Well, that's a good answer about choice and about knowing your product, knowing its behavior, and then customize it by selecting it based upon texture, condition, porosity, and results. And like you said a second ago, most importantly, what the client in your chair wants and to try to deliver on that. So,
absolutely, yeah,
Leslie, thank you for that. I'm going to
yep,
conclude part one,
okay,
and we're going to rejoin and get to pick your brain a little bit more in part two.
okay, great, all right.